that Chief Justice of Kenya should be bold,
a good communicator,
courageous,
confident, is a person of integrity,
independent and not influenced by politicians,
diligent,
the strong jurisprudential background and track record.
In your house. My name is Silas. I'll be moderating alongside my co-moderator, Jane Moore here. Jane?
Well, judicial independence is a vital pillar in the constitutional order. However, it is constantly under threat across Africa and remains a more distant ideal in most countries. While the judiciary is the custodian of the rule of law in any democratic system of governance, the socio-political elites continue to underplay its role in ensuring that justice is administered fairly and transparently, especially in political processes. Attacks against the judiciary have been on the rise, both at institutional and personal levels. For this reason, as the head of the judiciary, the Chief Justice plays a critical role in ensuring judicial independence is respected and observed.
Now, the recruitment of Kenya's CJ comes against a backdrop of worrying trends across the region. In Congo, in 2019, Honorable Justice Yanyi was killed after presiding over a high-profile corruption trial of Vital Kamerhe, the president of the Chief of Staff. In Uganda, the Constitutional Court noted that the judiciary's independence was in jeopardy because of budget cuts and budget funding, and the court noted in a judgment that the funding of the judiciary in Uganda was inconsistent with the law. Now, in South Sudan, President Salva Kiir fired 14 senior judges without input from the Judiciary Service Commission. In Malawi, the chief secretary to government attempted to send the Chief Justice and one other Supreme Court judge on compulsory leave pending their retirement. And this followed the decision to nullify the 2019 presidential election. In Côte d'Ivoire, the Constitutional Court approved President Alassane's bid to run for a third term, contrary to the law, amidst violence and executive influence. And this revealed executive influence in the judiciary. In Kenya, we remember in mid-2019, the Judiciary Service Commission gave, or rather they recommended 41 individuals to be appointed in the Court of Appeal and High Court. And to date, none of these have been appointed. Now 40, having passed on. Now, the chief justices in all these jurisdictions are at the center of the attacks and at the center of political heat.
Meanwhile, the political class in Kenya has been engaged in political discourses and contestations around constitutional change through the Building Bridges initiative. The BBI proposals, the ensuing vacancies in Kenya's superior courts, and succession politics in the judiciary are increasingly being used as vehicles to capture the judiciary by the political elites. Through today's discussions, ICJ Kenya hopes to trigger public discourse on the caliber of candidates and why it matters, and the role of the various constitutional commissions in ensuring that the candidates for the position of the CJ aspire and espouse the ideals set out in Chapter 6 of the Kenyan Constitution.
Now, to lead our discussions today, we are joined by very eminent panelists, distinguished panelists. On our panel today, there's Don Dea, who's the Executive Director of the Pan-African Lawyers Union. Don, say hello. And then we're joined by Rosalind Hanzi. Rosalind Hanzi is the Executive Director of Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights. Unfortunately, Rosalind is not able to join us at the moment because of unavoidable reasons. We have Waikwa Wanyoike, who's the head of litigation at the Open Society Justice Initiative. And then we have Bobby Mkangi, who is a constitutional lawyer. He's a former member of the Committee of Experts, an honorary director at the National Democratic National Democratic Association, and then Eastern Africa for Constitutional Development Uganda, and is also an independent consultant on government and children issues. Welcome. To start off our conversation, we will start with Don. Don, do you think that the region should be interested in Kenya's choice for the next Chief Justice? And what exactly do you think will be the impact of Kenya's Chief Justice in the region? Don, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Silas. My short answer to that would be yes, for several reasons. First, all of Africa is important to all of Africa. Our needs for democracy, for good governance, for the rule of law, the just rule of law, for human and people's rights, for peace and security is important to all of Africa. And Africa has set for itself pretty good standards on how we should be governed. From the Constitutive Act of the African Union, which is our basic constitution as a continent, from the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which is the basis of our Continental Bill of Rights, to the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance, which is our gold standard for those three things. Now, Kenya is an important player in the evolution of the African Union. It has been right from the OEU in 1963. If you want to talk about the 8 or 9 most powerful diplomatic actors, states on the continent, driving the continent and helping drive how the continent engages with the rest of the world, Kenya is there. As of January this year, we are rolling out the African Continental Free Trade Area. And again, Kenya, being a major trading nation on the continent and a trading leader, has a central role to play. If you look at the East African community, Kenya is for the time being the anchor economy of the East African community. And as you may know, just this past weekend, last Saturday, we had a summit of heads of state of the East African community, and Kenya assumed the rotational chair of the EAC for the next 12 months. And at the same time, its nominee, Dr. Peter Mtuku Mathuki, was appointed Secretary General of the EAC for the next 5 years. Similarly, we play a central role in the Great Lakes, in the Horn of Africa region. If you look at IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, if you look at ICGLR, the International Conference of the Great Lakes region, Kenya is a central player. Historically, was a central player in negotiating the peace that we've had that led to the separation of the two Sudans, and even in South Sudan right now, and also in Somalia. So Kenyan stability is important for stability in the region. And also Kenyan leadership and Kenyan positive example is important to set trends in the region, and we have traditionally done so. So handling this process well will set a new bar or stabilize a bar, which then it will be easy for the neighboring states to also, measure up to and be held to account with. So yes, I think this is very important for the region and for the continent.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Don. So having in mind that handling this process is really critical for not only Kenyans, but the region at large. So what exactly do you think are the priority areas for the incoming Chief Justice, once in office, both from a regional perspective and a national perspective?
I'll speak more of the regional perspective for now, and maybe allow the other colleagues to speak a bit more of the national perspective. Doesn't mean I can't add on to that. And to just say, last Friday, PALU, the Pan-African Lawyers Union, together with the African Court Coalition, and with the support of the Open Society Foundations, both the regional office, OSF Afro, and the Open Society Justice Initiative, the African Program Team, we held a 3-hour webinar on this issue of judicial independence in Africa, with the theme of reimagining Africa's judiciaries and the legal profession in the context of democratic recession. We had 113 colleagues, from all 5 regions of Africa, and indeed from our 6th region from the diaspora. And the issue of, we put squarely discussion on judicial independence and how we should reimagine how we should act going forward. And several points came out. One, the tendency of many people is to call the judiciary the third arm of government. But that's not what our constitution provides for. Our constitution provides that the judiciary is one of the three arms of government. And it brought out the importance of leadership from the very top in ensuring that there's judicial independence, which can then guarantee judicial efficiency and judicial effectiveness. So one of the things that we're expecting from a Chief Justice of an anchor country in the region, in the larger region and on the continent, is that first she or he will strengthen the solidarity that they have with other Chief Justices and with other judiciaries across the region and the continent. Our meeting brought out the importance of judiciaries mutually reinforcing each other. Earlier on, Silas, you gave the example of Malawi last year, when the then president, now former president, Professor Peter Mutharika, ironically, a celebrated professor of law before he went into politics, tried to illegally sack the Chief Justice. And of course, we as citizens of the region, as lawyers of the region, we launched a campaign. And one of the greatest points of strength of the Chief Justice and the judiciary then was the solidarity that they got from other Chief Justices through the Southern African Judges Commission, through the African Judges and Juries Forum, and through just individual Chief Justices and senior judges calling them. So strengthening that solidarity across the region, so we've got a strong network of strong judiciaries is very important, and that's a task I put before the Chief Justice. Also just strengthening collaboration and cooperation between the judiciaries towards their mutual objectives on administration of justice, on efficiency and effectiveness in the administration of justice, on producing world-class jurisprudence and comparing this jurisprudence so that they strengthen each other. And of course, you know, at the level of the AU, we have an African human rights system, and we have an African governance architecture where our leadership has said that various organs and institutions operating at continental, sub-regional, and national level must work together. So a strong leadership of the judicial arm of government in this is something that we'd expect the Kenyan Chief Justice to lead from the front.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Don. I think from you have really had a strong network of judges across the region and strengthen a solidarity with other CJs, basically to see an interplay of how these chief justices, or rather the judiciaries, more collaborating and cooperating across the region. But most importantly, you have noted that Kenyan stability is important for the stability in the region, and the chief justices in these regions, especially in Kenya, plays a very critical role in this. I'll give Jen to take us through the next speaker. Jen?
Yeah, thank you, Silas and Don. Indeed, the judiciary is not the third arm of government, but it's an arm of government. We must correct ourselves and say it as it is to avoid even undermining the judiciary in our own minds. Now, to cast the spotlight a bit on Kenya, we move on to Waikwa. Since the 2010 constitution, Kenya has had two chief justices, that is Honorable Willy Mutunga and Honorable David Maraga, who just retired. And my question to you, Waikwa, is what is the legacy left by these two chief justices in Kenya? And how should the next chief justice protect those gains? Over to you, Waikwa.
Thank you, and thank you to ICJ for organizing this webinar. It's a very important topic. So just very quickly to look at the legacies of both Justice Mutunga and Justice Maraga. A few things to note. One, and what maybe is most important for me, is institutional courage and judicial independence. As you know, when Justice Mutunga came into office in 2011, there was very little separation between the judiciary and the executive. Judiciary was seen as just an appendage of the executive. That had been a problem. It was one of the reasons that we sought to have a constitutional review. Yet one of the things that we saw from very early on, partly enhanced through the vetting of judges, and elimination of judges who had questionable past, but also the infusion of new energy within the judiciary through new judges was development of institutional courage. And later on, I'll be speaking about personal courage and making a distinction. But we saw, for example, very early on, courts willing to issue orders against President Kibaki. So in fact, that's how we ended up with the judiciary of all Chief Justice Mutunga coming into office. We also saw quite a bit of assertiveness in the judiciary, indication of judicial independence, and that has continued. That played out significantly, especially in the era of Maraga, because of just the level of contestation. The second thing I would highlight is enhanced judiciary resources, and this is in both budgetary terms, but also in human resource. As most people know, when the pre-2010 judiciary was operating on the neighborhood of 3 billion per year budget. In 2012 or 2013 and going forward, the judiciary budget has been 17 billion each year. Unfortunately, it's not grown much, but it was a big spike initially, and that meant a lot in terms of even the ability of the judiciary to hire more people, more judges, more magistrates, and engage in significant physical infrastructure, which is my third point, that there has been significant changes in terms of just the physical infrastructure that we have. That includes courtroom and latest, of course, in terms of technology, we've seen a lot of that. The number of courts increased. The number of counties with courts have gone up within the two periods, or the two periods of Chief Justice Mutunga and Maraga, something we were not seeing in the past. Judicial officers are well resourced, even in terms of just things they need to be able to do their work. Then I would also say that training, acceptance of training of judges as a concept and enhanced training, that has been a big thing throughout the two tenures. And we've seen the impact of that in terms of the kind of jurisprudence, the quality of jurisprudence, the speed at which judges are able just to churn out judgments, and magistrates, obviously. I believe there has been some regional and global visibility of our judiciary, which is also a big plus. I guess the judgment relating to the presidential election did a lot to sort of put Kenya in global jurisprudential map. But even before that, there were good judgments, and more so, unfortunately, not so much at the Supreme Court, but we saw quite good judgments at the High Court. And critical gain is demystification of the judiciary and sort of getting the judiciary to interact more with the people. And maybe one of the most revolutionary concepts that was introduced and sustained in these two terms is the concept of a court users committee, where people are able to participate and interact with judges, magistrates, and other judicial officers, and be able to highlight what issues they are facing in the community. We see judges and magistrates and other judicial officers engage in public marches, and even in terms of their own well-being, we've seen certain improvements. So that demystification is important, even in terms of enhancing the substantive element on access to justice. I just want to highlight a few negative, or what may be seen as negative impact. So the first one is polarization between the arms of government, and that was to happen, especially for a judiciary transitioning from an appendage of the executive to a judiciary asserting independence. And as you highlighted at the beginning, this is not just something happening in Kenya, it's something happening across the continent. And in fact, globally, Poland has had a long stretch of judges trying to assert themselves, and quite a number of Eastern European countries, we've seen that. You can stretch this whether to the US or other parts of the world. In England, there was a bit of polarization between the judiciary and the executive in relation to Brexit. So these things happen, which polarization itself may be negative, but it also has its salutary effects. Backlog hasn't been addressed sufficiently as the two Chief Justices promised, and that's still a problem. And in fact, it seems, again, we are a case backlog is in the rise. Supreme Court, because I think it's important. The Chief Justice is also the President of the Supreme Court. I still feel that our Supreme Court has not been able to assert its full capacity, whether as the most authoritative court in the land, but also regionally, and having significant or its place in global jurisprudential space. I think Supreme Court could do better. Occasionally, when it pens consequential decision, you can tell there is capacity, but I still believe there is not significant efficiency and taking advantage of moments to be a leader in jurisprudence. And finally, corruption is still a problem and has been in the last 2 tenures. Let me leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Waikwa. I think the question that comes to mind then is bearing in mind the milestones and bearing in mind the challenges that we still face in the judiciary. And also recalling that generally, one would argue that all judges are qualified for the position of Chief Justice by virtue of meeting the requirements within the Constitution and within applicable legislation. What would you say is the exact criteria to be used to set apart and say, this is the right Chief Justice for Kenya? And what would you say are best practices across the region of Africa and even without Africa that should guide us in this process?
Yeah, so let's start with the best practices, because that then helps us distill to the criteria. First of all, there is sort of guiding principles globally on what's the best practices for appointment of judges. And here I'm being very deliberate to say judges. Again, I've not seen very, very specific criteria on appointment of Chief Justice, and even when it is there, what you find it's the dominant piece is the appointment of a judge, because traditionally Chief Justices are understood to be judges first, and then Chief Justices second. I'll be arguing maybe we need to disabuse ourselves of that notion. For that reason, you'll find, for example, we have the Bangaral principle, we have the UN guidelines on independence. We also now have the Commonwealth principles, and the Commonwealth principles is what mostly I would want to highlight, because they sort of integrate what is in Bangaral and UN guidelines, and then sort of expand that, but also provide a comparative analysis of the various jurisdictions. And then we know down to sort of topical issues that each country must ensure it has in order to ensure judicial independence and the best selection of judges. And so some of those, I want to highlight three. Is the first one is ensuring that there is an independent body that exercises the function of selection of judges and the Chief Justice. And there is no one good model. Some models are better, but there is no verdict that this is the most superior model, because it's also context based. But certainly a model that ensures that the process is as independent, especially independent from executive and parliament, is much more a superior model. The second relates to general competence of a judge, and the general competence goes to issues of both intellectual competence and other professional competence that are required of a judge. One can add to that in the context of the Chief Justice, its leadership, and I may speak to that a bit more later. Then there is an expectation that there has to be clear, either clear separation between the executive and the judiciary, and this is slightly different from independence, or very clear law of what the other institutions, the role that other institutions play. So for example, do you only limit the appointment or the role of the president to appointment? So in our case, for example, we know, and based even on court decisions, that the president's power only is limited to going by the decision of the Judicial Service Commission based on its recommendation, and not substituting his own views. And that is the paralysis that we've been having with the appointment of 41 judges. And in that sense, then, the president is actually acting more as head of state, not necessarily head of government in his ceremonial role. So that spelling out the specific role is very important. Again, for the legislature, what is the specific role of the legislature? In our situation for Chief Justice and Deputy Chief Justice, legislature is involved in the confirmation once the recommendation is made. And so that's fairly clear, but it could be clearer in terms of defining what is acceptable in terms of that vetting. Yes, we do have legislation on appointment and vetting, but we know our parliament sometimes is quite rogue when it comes to the procedure of confirmation. Again, nothing necessarily too unique because we see that in other parts of the world. That doesn't mean I'm trying to excuse the malfeasance of parliament. But going to the specific criteria, it's important to highlight that actually for Kenya, in the Judicial Service Act, there is an entire schedule about the criteria that is to be used in selection of judges. And it ranges from professional competence, which involves intellectual capacity, diligence, knowledge of the law, and the like. And then it goes to good writing skills and ability just to communicate, not just in written form, but also in oral form. Then issues of integrity, which is critical in our jurisdiction, the ability to evaluate judges, and specifically the Chief Justice, levels of integrity, and then others, fairness, good judgment, and such. And if you may would argue that while our processes are open, in the sense of being the interview processes being available to the public or open to the public, they are broadcast, we still have quite a bit to do in terms of the actual openness. So for example, even though we have legislative criteria on how you choose judges and how you choose a Chief Justice, we don't really know what happens in the boardroom, the JSC boardroom, once the doors are shut. And unlike other jurisdictions where Judicial Service Commissions will even make public their minutes in terms of selection and all that, that hasn't happened to us. In South Africa, for example, we've seen litigation on this issue in terms of criteria, that the actual criteria that was being used in selection, and sometimes disclosure of how the different members of the Judicial Service Commission voted, being made public through orders in litigation. And maybe so looking forward, we have to ask ourselves whether we are getting into a place where we may want to be asking the JSC to be much more open. In 2016, during the last election, some of us had problems with the way the Judicial Service initially shortlisted, and you remember there was litigation that ended up forcing the Judicial Service Commission to reopen the shortlisting, and which Judicial Service Commission interpreted to mean that they had to interview everyone, regardless of whether they met the minimum thresholds to be interviewed. During the selection of the 41 judges that we've been all talking about, the initial process, there was indication that the Judicial Service Commission wanted to close it from public limelight. And it took a bit of advocacy for the Judicial Service Commission to commit that it would make it an open, publicly accessible process. So I think there are still fights to be had, whether it's on criteria or just how actually the Judicial Service Commission interprets its mandate. Let me stop there.
Okay, thank you so much, Waiko, and thank you for highlighting indeed that the more open the process is, the better, even in giving credibility to the final outcome. And before we proceed at this point, I would like to remind our participants that we welcome your questions. We'll have Q&A sessions in between sessions. So we invite you to, you can also call in, you can post your questions, and we'll be engaging our panelists. At this point, I think Gabriel is on standby. He would like to pose a question. Gabriel, please unmute your mic if you can, okay. If you can hear me.
Yeah, I'm getting you.
Yeah.
Okay, my name I'm Gabriel from Kwale, and I'm Kwale Baralical Network. Every time we are trying to watch how the process of Chief Justice, the way inafanyika hapa Kenya. And I don't know where the community, especially community, to come in to see if the Chief Justice pia anaangalia masuala ya community, na pia kama community pia wanaweza mtambua kwa kazi yake kabla pengine zile panelists za kuweza kumchukua. Je, hapa chini katika sehemu ya wananchi wanaweza toa maoni kuhusu Chief Justice ambaye pengine watakuwa wako pale na pengine wanachukuliwa. Swali la pili ni kwamba kulingana na wenye tumekuwa nao, tumeweza kuona wakijaribu pengine kuweka mahakama kuwa independent, na kila wakati tukienda wenye tumeweza kwenda mahakamani unapata kwamba tungali na shida katika mahakama. Je, ni njia gani ambayo Chief Justice wanaweza sukumwa ili kuhakikisha kwamba mahakama yetu imeweza kuboreshwa na imeweza kufanya kazi kwa njia inayostahili? na pili kuweza kupunguza kesi ambazo zimerumbana kotini. Kuna kesi nyingi unapata ziko kotini za mashamba za miaka nenda rudi, lakini bado tunaangalia machaji hawajachukua nafasi ya kuweza kuzishughulikia. Zingine unasikia mpaka order itoke kwa Chief Justice. Sasa je, ni njia gani ambayo tutapata Chief Justice ambaye anaweza kuwa na msukumo katika masuala ya jamii hapa chini?
Asante sana, Gabriel. And just put it in English for the benefit of our participants who might not have understood Gabriel. And as I do this, I'll pose this question to both Waikwa and Don. Gabriel asks, is there opportunity for common mwananchi to participate in this process? Sometimes people argue that public participation in the way it is today is just to check boxes, or it's only for the benefit of certain people in the society. So Gabriel asks, what is the place of common mwananchi in echoing his voice or her voice in this process? And he also asks, we have seen Honorable Willie Mutunga and Honorable David Maraga really trying their best to guard the independence of the judiciary, but we still face various challenges. And therefore he asks, is there anything that can be done to ensure that the next Chief Justice is able to overcome these challenges? Or do we just accept that it is going to take us some time? Over to you. We can start with you, Don.
Thank you. And thank you, Gabriel, for that question. I think there are various ways provided for by our constitution and our law in which citizens can participate in the process of arrival at the best possible candidate for Chief Justice, bearing in mind, as we said earlier, that this is the leadership of one of the three core arms of government. And one way is by ensuring that there is inclusion and there is diversity in the body that plays a central role on arriving at the Chief Justice, and that is the Judicial Service Commission. So that is why we, the people of Kenya, gave ourselves a constitution in which we tried to provide for a Judicial Service Commission that had diversity, had representation of the judiciary itself, had representation of the organized legal profession, had representation of other arms of government, had representation of the people through the direct appointees. So I think that's one key thing. But a second key thing, and I think Waikwa has alluded to this in terms of the advocacy that was engaged in the process of arriving at the second Chief Justice, the Honorable David Maraga, is how the public is involved is invited to participate in the process, to observe the process, to ensure that they think it meets the minimum standards, to be able to send in submissions, either in general or in regard to specific candidates on their worthiness or lack of worthiness for that office. So I think this is what is provided for. And I think especially institutions or people who get to represent institutions, such as the Law Society of Kenya's representatives on the Judicial Commission, they really need to bear in mind that part of why they're there is to give vent, to give life to the aspirations of the people, to represent the people to the best of their ability in terms of discharging the function of ending up with the best candidate that we can get. So I think there is scope for public participation, and it is important to hold events such as this, where we engage the public, so the public also gets heard, and we are required to be faithful. Even in this case, for the Kenyan section of the International Commission of Juries, ICJ Kenya, one of our strongest civil society bodies, in collating what are the aspirations and requests, demands of the people, and channeling them to the decision makers that we have appointed in our constitutional system. Thank you.
Great. Just to remind our participants also that they can join us in the conversation through our social media platforms under the hashtag #JajiMkuu and #ChiefJusticeKE. You can tag us at ICJ Kenya. You can tag PALU at Pan-African Laws Union. Please check the OSJI Twitter handle as well, and that would be great so that we have your comments and contributions included in this conversation. We have some few more questions, if it's okay. One question from Irungu Horton. As advocates, what are your expectations of the first 100 days of the next Chief Justice? How would the leader be vetted? And could it be similar to the one that we did for the Inspector General of Police? And then we have a comment from our hashtag from Twitter, our T, our voice, our choice, that the next Chief Justice must have high moral character, integrity, and impartiality, as well as meet requirements of Chapter 6 of the Constitution on leadership and integrity. So we have all these comments coming in. Please raise your hands so that we can have you speak out. We can have one more question answered. I think Dawn and Waikwa, and yeah, you can have those questions before we bring in Bobby. Over to you, Dawn.
Sorry, I actually thought you were going to give Waikwa an opportunity before coming back to me, but be that as it may. With regard to Irungu's question, Comrade Irungu's question on what do we want to see in the first 100 days, for me, one of the things I'd like to see is whether there can be an opportunity to reset the relationships with the other two arms of government, with the legislature and also with the executive and with the chiefs of the executive, in terms of, whereas I personally do not find fault with anything that the Honorable David Kenanu Maraga did, especially in trying to assert the independence of the judiciary, that sometimes a change of face, a change of personality can give us an opportunity to reset. So we go back to collaborative government, whereby each keeps their independence, but they realize that they're also interdependent and ought to collaborate to work together. That's one thing that I'd like to see. But the second thing that I'd like to see is, again, a Chief Justice that would project confidence for judicial officers, to make them feel confident that judicial independence is important to him, and that he or she will do whatever is required to guard that, so that we can have our judges and magistrates at whatever level of the judicial ladder, the judicial spectrum, being able to do their job with the confidence that so long as they're professional, they'll be watched. Third is especially in terms of how we have been ravaged by COVID-19. And we know in many places in the world, not just in Kenya or East Africa or Africa, the third arm of government has been quite ravaged by COVID and by the measures that we had to put in place. Now, Kenya has done better than most across the continent in trying to keep the administration of justice alive and working even during COVID. But much more can be done. And I'd hope that working with the National Council on the Administration of Justice, working with the Judicial Service Commission, and with other stakeholders, that one of the things that we'll see out of the woman or man who lead this arm of government in the first 100 days is how they will reach out to the people, which is really in line with the question that our comrade Gabriel Barasa asked earlier, to say that we're going to do our best to ensure that the administration of justice demonstrably remains as open as it can, using technology where it can, using other innovations where it can, because technology is not the only innovation. In lots of courts across the country, social distancing can be achieved by getting out of the courtroom and just setting up structures under trees and under shades, that they will do that the best, that he or she will lead in doing the best they can, in projecting to the public that this arm of government is open and will do the best it can in these circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. We have 4 hands up from Ivan Sogada. We have a hand up from Zachary Mokaya and David Topua and Foresai Titsiga. Please hold on for a few minutes. Let's hear from Waikwa first, and then Waikwa, and then Bobby, and then we'll let you speak if that's okay with you. Waikwa, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so just starting with at least one question by Gabriel. I know Don has addressed his questions, But in terms of what's happening with backlog, I think two things. One, we still have to keep insisting with our judges, the Chief Justice, magistrate, we have to keep pushing them to be more efficient. Having said that, I think Kenyans never appreciate how much work our judicial officers carry and judges carry, especially at the level of magistracy and high court. It's overwhelming work. Judges and magistrates who work diligently hardly ever sleep. If you think about it, the Judicial and Constitutional Human Rights Division, which is where I ordinarily practice when I do, gets about 500 petitions every year. Those are to be dealt with by 2 judges. These are very, very heavy cases. One matter can result in about 3 or 4 rulings before a judge gives a judgment. So even when you have a number of 500, that's still deceptive because the actual work would equate ordinarily to maybe 1,000 or 1,500 filings. And 2 judges have to do that. Just to put this into perspective, go look at how many pieces of legislation Parliament passes in every year and how many members of Parliament there are. And people will tell me, oh, members of Parliament are representative and so they spend most of their time with the people. Judges are also doing extrajudicial work, administrative work, magistrates have to do that. So it's important to always bring this perspective into the House for people to appreciate that probably within the public and private sector, there is no sector that is overworked like our judiciary. Having said that, the one other reason why we actually have backlog is because of the non-appointment of judges. At the moment, we have significant number of vacancies at the Court of Appeal. In fact, even if the 11 judges who are to be appointed to the Court of Appeal were being appointed, that would not have brought the complement to where it's supposed to be, which I think is 30 judges, so there would still be vacancies. There are vacancies at the High Court, there are vacancies at the Magistrate Court. So when your president refuses to undertake a very simple constitutional obligation of appointing judges, he's not just punishing Maraga, who he may not like because Malaga read the bench that overturned his election, his first election, although he forgets Maraga also led the bench that didn't overturn his second election. He actually is punishing Kenyans, and that should be said. He's punishing all the judges. Judges are having to stay up longer because they have to do double the work. So let's call for accountability, not just at the judiciary, but even beyond the judiciary. On vetting, sorry, just one quick point to Gabriel's point. Gabriel, I think the concept of court users committee, it may not be as strong, but that's a really good avenue for communities to engage with judges and magistrates. But remember, as a starting point, the Constitution expects everybody to be transparent and accountable and for Kenyans to have opportunities for participation. So in your local area or the courtroom or the courthouse that you interact with, if they're not open, it's a reasonable demand to require to interact with the judiciary and address community issues. To a point made by Rongo, and I just want to talk about the vetting question. He asked whether it should be comparable to the speaker of, or to the police IG. I think Chief Justice is a very, very different ballgame from the IG of the police, Houghton. Partly because the police, even though it's supposed to have its own independence, it doesn't sit in the same way the judiciary sits as an arm of government, and so the CJ being the head of the arm of government. While independence is expected and professionalism from the police, again, there's substantive difference in terms of how that is exercised. So I would say we actually have the laws and the criteria to come up with this, and the criteria doesn't start with the Judicial Service Commission Act. It starts with the Constitution in terms of what the Constitution requires of a Chief Justice, and I can speak to that a bit later. And then obviously the criteria, including intellectual leadership, which I think we are under it in our jurisdiction, although we've done well with the last Chief Justices, but still a significant component. So I would say it's quite different lens that one has to wear while vetting who should be the Inspector General and who should be CJ. I wish we could bring the standards of vetting the Inspector General, especially in terms of showing independence, to the level of CJ. Thank you.
Coming in, participants, please be patient with us. We'll have a full-on Q&A after all the panelists have spoken. At this point, I would just like to bring in Bobby Mukange into the conversation. Bobby, I hope you're with us. Yeah.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah, and to just pick it up from what Don and Waikwa have already alluded to, is this specific question of how do we bridge the gap that now exists between the judiciary and the other two arms of government, because that is going to be a really huge task for the next CJ. And then how can the CJ then address the challenges left within the judiciary? Over to you, Bobby.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by stating that aspects of the issue that I'm addressing has already been addressed by my co-panelists in one way or another. But what we need to appreciate first in addressing the gaps is when we talk about gaps or the gap, what are we highlighting or what do you want to address? And Waikwa did point out some of the gaps, and in this regard, we're talking about the shortcomings. We are talking about the negatives that have visited with us from 2012 to now. We are talking about the missing links that we are seeing in the performance of the judiciary. And in this sense, I'd like to look at the gap or the gaps in two ways, that there are some which are internal and some which are external. I won't dwell a lot on the internal ones, talking about institutional and structural deficiencies, talking about corruption, lack of professionalism, unethical performance by judges and other judicial officers, talking about the inadequate infrastructural wherewithal that is, with our judiciary right now. Those, when you look at, and especially the reports, and for that matter, statutory reports that the judiciary has been churning out every year, the state of the judiciary. I think there's a lot that shows that the judiciary has been trying very much to meet the issues that Kenyans did address and for that matter clamored to have a new constitution, which we saw fruition in 2010 in terms of having a judiciary that was effective and efficient in the delivery of justice for Kenyans. And for that matter, that's why Kenyans, in assessing the experiences that they had gone through since 1963, and even before that, during the colonial times, did stress on the point of ensuring that we must have a judiciary that is robustly independent. We must have a judiciary that is well-funded, well-equipped. We must have a judiciary that runs with a professional etiquette. And we must also have a judiciary that is alive to the philosophy of the constitutional dispensation that Kenyans clamored for this. And we've seen it, as I mentioned, coming out in the reports. And these reports show the level of accountability that the judiciary has been trying to function with and within. And this is very well spelled out in the strategic manner that the judiciary has focused in serving Kenyans. When you look at how it has branded its strategies in terms of entrenching and recognizing that transformation is a key target of the very important arm of government, with the first strategic plan that was aimed at transforming the judiciary, with a second strategic plan that was overseen by the immediate former Chief Justice, Honorable Maraga, that sought to sustain the transformation. And now, and that strategic plan is actually lapsing this year. And with the coming of the next Chief Justice, I think Kenyans will be happy to see that the Chief Justice keeps on and doubles down with this venture of ensuring that we keep enduring the transformative mechanisms and ideas that have been entrenched by Chief Justice Maraga and Willy Mutunga. And so, to me, those internal issues, and I invite you to look at the reports and the strategic plans that I've mentioned, you will see that a lot has been achieved, but again, a lot needs to be undertaken or achieved, and I think Waikwa did allude to this quite ably. But the second aspect of it, in terms of the gap, is what I would like to spend more time on, and that is the external gaps that pertain to the functioning of the judiciary. And these external gaps come in the sense that the judiciary, as we've been saying, is a co-equal in terms of the different phases of the state and the government, and Kenyans identify this. The judiciary is derived of the sovereignty of Kenyans and all Kenyans for that matter. And the judiciary does not work in a vacuum, functions, or is supposed to function, as Maraga did put in his valedictory message, in a way that should be constructive, and constructive interdependence between it, the executive, and the legislature. But we have seen many failures that have visited with the institution of the judiciary, in as much as it has strived to ensure that it beats and circumvents the problems that bedevil it prior to Constitution of Kenya 2010 and thereafter. But when you address and analyze many of these issues in terms of, say, its case management, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of financial wherewithal, where we have the issue of, say, the Judiciary Fund, which unfortunately has never been enabled, in terms of alternative ways of ensuring that Kenyans can access justice. When you talk about issues of small claims courts, when you talk about other alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, when you look at the judges and judicial officials ratio to the population, which as of now is at an embarrassing 3 to 100 million. This compared to countries like the USA, at over 100, the UK at 51, India at 19, means that there's still a lot to be done. But has the judiciary addressed this issue? Yes, it has. It has pointed this issue out to Kenyans. It has pointed out these issues to the relevant arms of government, the legislature, and the executive, in instances enabling legislation and policy avenues have been put in place. But we know that these have not been effected because of the posture that other arms of government have taken against the judiciary. When you talk about what I would like to call a political hysteresis, in terms of the fact that in as much as the Constitution of Kenya is transformative and the judiciary has taken this on board, and as I mentioned, when you look at their strategic approaches to how to ensure there is better justice for Kenyans, you find this is not attendant or is not manifest with other arms of government, that even with the reformative activities that have been, and interventions that have been undertaken, this unfortunately still lagging behind with the way other political players and institutions, constitutional, statutory, and even socially play into this. We still have people who believe that the judiciary is subordinate to the executive, to the legislature, and to other political players. And that's why we are seeing the fight back that is. And yes, we know this has been buttressed primarily after the 2017 decision by the Supreme Court on the results of the presidential elections. But we know this had been going on since the Supreme Court and Chief Justice, retired Chief Justice Willy Mutunga was appointed as the Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court. So the posturing and the attempt to push back and to, in a certain way, make the judiciary style up and operate as it was prior to 2010 has been ongoing and will be ongoing. And that's one gap that really needs to be looked into critically. And more so considering that the judiciary, with its venture of transformation, or rather this venture is still pretty much young, 8, 9 to 10 years. And this definitely is a very, very, very section or period of time for institutions that makes them very, very vulnerable. When you talk about the posture that whether it's a political class and at times even society, and I think this again comes out in the reports that the judiciary has churned out and publicized, the disobedience of court orders, whether by the political class or by us, wananchi, when we get orders and we go and try to renegotiate them or reinforce them using other means, it does curtail the rule of law. And so there is that gap that also needs to be looked into. The mechanisms of accountability that the judiciary has come up with, coming closer to wananchi, having open fora, trying to be accessible through technology, etc. Those are important, but I think more work needs to be done in this regard. And so the Chief Justice coming in, I think, and as has been pointed out before, and I think it's Dawn who said this, that it's when we say what does the next Chief Justice need to do, there's an implication that perhaps it's the former Chief Justices or the institution of the judiciary that has probably done something wrong. And in good analysis and assessment, in as much as we appreciate those internal issues that have been mentioned and ways of dealing with them have also been recommended, and I think we're going to discuss them later. It's very much how the external and other appendages of society and the state have behaved towards the judiciary that has made it very difficult for the judiciary to achieve the goals that it has for wananchi. And so the question, I think, should be very much framed within the framework of, so if the Chief Justices, former Chief Justices, have done a proper job of ensuring that they posture the institution of the judiciary as a co-equal institution of government, as an independent institution, as Kenyans would have it through the Constitution, then why is there this failure? And I think that's why the Chief Justice definitely needs more assistance from those of us who are stakeholders and players within this forum. We have mentioned issues to do with advocacy, and I think this is where we need to come in. Civil society organizations, individuals who have influence and wherewithal, and this is within the country and without. I mean, we have the African Judges and Juries Forum, and we've seen the sort of interventions they've had in places like Zimbabwe and Uganda last year to do with the elections. I think Dawn talked about PALU, East African Law Society. So I think we need to double down on this advocacy ventures of ensuring that the judiciary and indeed the incoming Chief Justice is supported. But in the way that he or she must come in, and Irungu asked about the 100 days, to me, I would think it would be very important for the incoming Chief Justice in those first 100 days to first of all come in and concretize the posture that retired Chief Justice Maraga and retired Chief Justice Mutunga have done to ensure that the judiciary looks and is independent. The judiciary is an institution that Kenyans can have confidence in and put their trust in. So I would love for the incoming Chief Justice to come in and through rhetoric and posture, ensure that he or she guards this territory jealously. And I think if this is done, then the advocacy work, the people surrounding, and especially the external players surrounding the Chief Justice and the judiciary should come in and give strategic assistance in ensuring that that posture is sustained and enhanced. Because again, and coming back to the point of asking ourselves whether the onus is upon the Chief Justice, because if we keep thinking about it in that regard, as I was saying, will eventually lead our discussion to sort of appreciating this issue as an issue where the judiciary has done something wrong. And that's why I think other external players need to come in so that the Chief Justice, in as much as is supposed to come in and in a diplomatic way, try and carve out and reach out and build bridges with other arms of government and sectors of society. But this will be and must be done in a very delicate and refined way, because if the Chief Justice comes in and is seen to be placating, seen to be subordinate to the other arms of government, is seemed to be a pushover and a person who belongs to that old theory that the judiciary is a subordinate institution within government, then the game will have been lost. And so that must be addressed quite delicately, and that's why I think strategically it may have to take the intervention of other players to try and ensure that that bridge is built, that gap is reduced in a way that guarantees the independence and accountability of the institution of the judiciary. Otherwise, if we expect it to be the duty and role of the incoming Chief Justice to come in and start making calls, sort of begging, sort of asking for forgiveness for something that the institution of the position and the institution of the judiciary is, then we may lose a lot. Don did mention about a change of personality, a change of face, sometimes providing opportunity, and I think it's a real opportunity. Sometimes in the discourse about the gap between the judiciary and other arms of government, and particularly the judiciary and the national executive, and for that matter, the presidency. I think we've tried to parochially look at it and narrow this issue to almost seem like it's a personal vendetta between, or was a personal vendetta between the retired Chief Justice and the president. And to me, I think that was a way of belittling the expansive philosophical imagination about how the state is formed, how it is supposed to perform, and the role of the leadership of the different divisions within the state and government. And so the incoming Chief Justice is lucky in this regard that, as Isaac Newton did put out, that we stand on the shoulders of giants so that we can see further or farthest. He or she is lucky in the regard that he or she will come and stand on the shoulders of two giants who have very much guarded the independence, accountability, professional performance of the judiciary from the time that Kenyans churned out a new constitution. And what he or she needs to do is try and look farthest from this very high point that he or she will be standing on. Let me leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bobby. I think at this point, I would just like to reiterate, in case you joined us late, that the constitution of the panel as it currently stands was not intentional on our part, but only happened due to circumstances that led to Ms. Rosalind Hanze not being able to join us. And we sincerely apologize for that. And now back to the conversation, and to you, Bobby, I think there's something you mentioned about the disobedience of court orders, and I think it's something that we might need to emphasize further. Based on a question from one Robert Natwoli, he says, I'm an ordinary Kenyan citizen and I have witnessed the government disobey court orders with impunity. What is the need to have courts, and does it mean that the courts or CJ can do nothing to such issues? Bobby, what would be your response to Robert?
I think retired Chief Justice Maraga left office, if I may put it this way, crying about this issue. And it's the issue that he prominently pointed out to illustrate the biggest gap or the widest gap, not so much between the judiciary and the national executive, but in the broader sense of activating the principle of the democratic principle of living under the rule of law. And so if Kenyans did appreciate the veracity and the weight of what retired Chief Justice Maraga was saying, is that our state is actually under threat when this happens. So it is not, as I was saying earlier, an issue of simply personalities and people disobeying court orders and it seeming like it is those personalities fighting courts, but it's actually an issue of an attempt to wrestle and to extinguish the very important principle of rule of law, which is a primary principle that equalizes us as Kenyans. It's one of the principles that through the new constitution or the 2010 constitution ensures that we can actually build something known as the nation of Kenya. It is the idea that it is law, it is the rules, it is the principles, it is the values that we've set out and declared in the constitution, that if we live within those precincts, and for that matter, the rule of law, that a nation known as Kenya shall emerge and sustain. So it is a grave issue in that regard. And I think Kenyans did witness the crippling and the inability and the the lack of wherewithal, because the judiciary, as I mentioned earlier, does not function in a vacuum, and the way our justice system and the way our state is created, there is separation of powers, but also interdependence, where when the courts issue orders, then other arms of government or other authorities and institutions are supposed to enforce those orders. First of all, obey them, respect them, and then make sure that they are enforced. So just like we saw with the ICC cases, where you find that a lot of what ICC want done within our precincts is very much dependent on political will, is very much dependent on calling the bluff of other institutions. Then you find it's the same within our local situation, that where there is no political will, where there is or an active will to an intention to subvert the democratic constitution that Kenyans have created for themselves and posterity. You find that there's very little that the very institution of the judiciary can do beyond the demarcation of its call of duty, powers and functions. And that's why I keep emphasizing that other players need to come in and support the judiciary, because I think the judiciary, up to where and when it issues orders, those orders, as I said, must be attended to by other institutions. And when these other institutions fail to do so, then other players, other stakeholders, I think must come into play, and in a very strong advocative way of holding these institutions to account. Otherwise, the judiciary, the former chief justices, the incoming chief justice, will keep, and importantly so, pointing out and positively supervening on the importance, and for that matter, Kenyans, hinting to us that we need to take action of whatever sort, of ensuring that we call these institutions to account, because these are not issues of personal vendetta. It's actually the state and our well-being as Kenyans that comes under threat when the rule of law is emasculated. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Bobby, for those very wise words. I think for me, my takeaway is when you're saying that really in the choosing of the next CJ in Kenya, perception is really key. And we have to choose someone who is not, does not appear to be impartial. We need to choose someone who is neutral, and that in the eyes of the public, this person is seen to be able to actually bring, the vision which Kenyans need. And I'm really happy that, Bobby, you were able to join us, because you were part of the team that actually birthed, or rather actually actualized the what you called the expansive philosophical imagination of Kenyans. So thank you so much, Bobby, for this. Moving forward, just to bring in more participants to voice out their questions, I would want to start with Evans and then Zachary, and then we'd move on to David Topua. Over to you, Evans.
Morning.
Good morning, Evans. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Can I be heard? I hope I'm loud and clear.
Very loud and clear. Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm happy I see familiar faces. My brother Don, my brother Waikwa, thank you very much. Nice to see you. Now, the latest round in the appointment of the Chief Justice and other judges reminds me of our hour of magnificent potential for renewal, a departure from the seedy past that was prevalent with the old order. It's a mixture of hope, but nonetheless, the pitfalls that come with rogue politics and politicians is here with us. Two quick comments. Public participation within the process of appointment is one thing. We have what we have as a band-aid system that has been cobbled up to suffice for public participation. But conceptually and legally, I think what we have as public participation in this country is a mockery of both intellect and legal knowledge. Secondly, I'll want the next Chief Justice to create a sustainable culture. What do I mean by a sustainable culture? We had Justice Mutunga exit when the robes at the Supreme Court were green in color, green and gold. Then enter Chief Justice Maraga and the old colonial wigs and the crimson red came back. Now, that might seem innocuous, but nonetheless, it is a statement and a symbolic statement as such. It means that the optics that you send out are here for us to read. We need the culture clarified. Finally, we need to have the Judicial Service Commission account to us. I have been consistent on this, that we need accountability for every step. I think my elder brother Waikwa alluded to this, the Helen Sulzman case in South Africa that decreed that
Evans, we've lost you a bit, Evans, there. Are you there?
Every step in the appointment process needs to heed from us. Thank you very much.
Great. I hope we lost you a bit, Evans. I hope the panelists were able to get your question there. But what I got from you is, the question of public participation. How are we able to bring in public participation in the process? Question from Zachary. Zachary, can you hear me? Zachary Mokaya.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great,
My
Zachary.
questions very much all the panelists and also the presenters. My name is Zachary Mukaya Onkware from Nyahururu. I represent the CJPC, that is Catholic Justice and Peace Commission. My questions are direct. I have several questions. That is, what should be done to corruption versus selective justice within the judicial system? Because a deadly monster that is killing our economy. Secondly, I would like to ask on the issue of direct confrontation between the Chief Justice and the executive. What should we do? And the third question is about, we have very good policies. So I'm asking myself, what should be done from policy to practice? We need to see something done from policy to practice, something that is tangible. The other thing is, I have what I would call the fear of the unknown. If the upcoming Chief Justice does not perform, what should the Judicial Service Commission do vis-a-vis the security of tenure? And lastly, I would like to know how far is the issue of the village courts, and also the issue of delayed justice or the issue of compensation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zachary. Very important questions coming up from Zachary. The mandate of the JSC the confrontation between the CJ, David Topua, and then Foresai Chitsiga. But before maybe David Topua is on, just a quick question that my brother Zachary has mentioned a bit of it, is the issue of judicial funding. How I would like maybe to hear a comment from each of the panelists on what do they think, or how do they think that chief justices across the region should address the issue of judicial funding. We can see issues coming from Uganda, Kenya, and other jurisdictions, including Zimbabwe, Tanzania, etc. So let's go to the next participant. David Topu, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Great, Topua, we can hear you. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much, Silas, and the ICJ family. I just have maybe 2 comments to make. That first, we embark on a journey of recruitment of a chief justice against a backdrop of an unruly executive with the president refusing to swear in judges. And also, as in drawing back from the past, we know how the Judicial Service Commission has behaved. For example, if you see a ruling by Judge Odunga, where the Trusted Society for Human Rights filed a matter where Justices Aaron Ringera and J.B. Ojwang names were left out of the list. That just shows to you how the recruitment of the Chief Justice in Kenya appears to more be of a political process more than a legal process. And further, that we've seen how, for example, anytime the judiciary tries to assert itself, and I really agree with what Waikwa said, that the judiciary of Kenya still has more to do in terms of asserting its authority. And I think there's a misconception, especially with the Maraga regime, that people viewed Maraga versus Uhuru more of as a personal issue. And I think it's high time that we see that as the continuous effort by the judiciary to assert its authority, and that the incoming Chief Justice really has a very big task in terms of carrying that forward and continuously fight for the role of the judiciary and asserting its authority as an equal arm of the government, as stipulated in Article 1 of the Constitution. And that it's very unfortunate because this actually happens in an era of constitutional dismemberment, as in where we're talking about a recruitment of judiciary ombudsman. I think it only slides the judiciary down where it is now. And so I think really that the incoming Chief Justice really has a lot to do. But now going to the recruitment process by the Judicial Service Commission, we really as in advocate for a people-centered process. We need a public participatory process where observers will be allowed, and as actually Waikwa put it, that it's it serves the public interest if minutes of such recruitments are actually made public. We don't qualified candidates to be condemned without being given reasons why they not qualify. And that also, that I would just like draw an analogy of how like the recruitment process of the current Deputy Chief Justice of South Africa was actually conducted. Judge Zondo, for those of you who had watched the proceeding, I think that process actually, as in my own analysis, met the public interest threshold of what could be termed as a fair process. And so I think that we really have a lot in terms of depoliticizing the Judicial Service Commission and make it a people-centered and independent commission, rather than really playing to the whims of the executive. Number 2, that the incoming Chief Justice has really a role to play, as in just last week, the Supreme Court of Uganda, the Honorable Attorney General of Uganda, quoted the Raila Odinga petition for 2013 in denying filing of additional evidence for those people who are in prison and could not then be able to swear the affidavits within the required time. Just like I'll seek a comment from the panelists on whether that ruling by the 2013 Mutunga court is really serves justice, and whether it's high time that that periods should be reviewed, and what is that the impact of that ruling in denying the filing of the 800-page affidavit on the issue of procedural technicalities vis-a-vis substantial justice under Article 159, and that the Chief Justices of Uganda and the whole of the bench actually has agreed with the Attorney General, and Bobby Wine was ultimately denied time to file additional evidence, premised on that strength that the Supreme Court of Kenya pronounced itself in. And therefore, I think we need, within the internal working of the Supreme Court, we really need to see a regime where each judge is able to pronounce themselves, not just coming up with a whole decision or judgment being labeled as the Supreme Court of Kenya's presidential petition, blah, blah, blah. We need like each judge to pronounce themselves because I think such an apex court and seeing the prominent role that the Supreme Court of Kenya really plays within the whole Pan-African region, it's very important that we move to that era of individual judges pronouncing themselves. And therefore, I think that is all I can say because of the interest of time. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Topua, for those comments and questions. I'll go forth and give Foresai Chitsiga. Foresai, are you there? All right. So I'll read out a question. I don't think Foresai is able to voice their question, but I'll read out a question from Saidi Gongo, which I think is a very good question for us. I am deeply concerned about associating the office of the CJ and the Supreme Court with the general election. The tendency to appoint a Chief Justice above 65 so that they don't sit in two election courts is really disturbing. Kindly discuss how this can be remedied. So we'll give a chance to the participants to address some of these questions. We'll start with Waikwa. Waikwa, are you there? It's been a while since we heard your voice.
Yes, I am. And I'm gonna try and combine the issue and maybe address one issue substantively and let them leave it to the other panelists. There was question or comment from Evans about this being a moment of renewal, from Zachary about the confrontation within the judiciary, and from Topua on unruly executive, and I guess they're associating the office of the Chief Justice with the general election. And I guess all these comments goes to, again, the question of what type of Chief Justice are we looking for at this moment. So for me then, the best way to address this is to go back to the first principles. And there's something so fundamental that Bobby mentioned or talked about, which is our tendency to associate the fights or the fight that especially Justice Maraga was having with the executive as a Justice Maraga individual fight, as opposed to seeing it in the broader context of an arm of government trying to assert itself. And just to go back to the first principles and comments about renewal and all that, the starting point is the Constitution. And so we have to ask ourselves, what does the Constitution require? And in this sense, three things I think are very, very critical for me. One, we have a constitutional democracy. Two, we say that our Constitution is transformative. And three, we've heard more and more about the concept of judicialization of politics. I think the better term is constitutionalization of politics. Why am I giving this very broad framing as opposed to the initial narrower framing that I had discussed earlier? Partly because while there is specific legislative criteria on the competencies a Chief Justice has to have or a judge, let's not forget that a Chief Justice occupies a very critical position in the Constitution. Why constitutional democracy first? Because constitutional democracy means that no one is above the law. But more importantly, it means that the ultimate authority of what the law says or what the law is the judiciary, not anybody else. And in that ultimate authority, the person at the apex is the Chief Justice. And so this is such a critical position in terms of definition of a constitutional democracy that seeing it in any other way would be minimizing and trivializing the position. And I'm talking about the position, not just the person. I think Bobby's instructions were critical. Transformative constitution, and why that is also critical in thinking about first principles when selecting the Chief Justice. Transformative because that's what we've been told our Constitution is about. And for some of us who look at the Constitution closely agree. But transformation about what? Again, because this term is bandied around everywhere. So if you talk to South Africans, they tell you they have the most transformative constitution. Anyone you talk to, or most countries you talk to, they will tell you they have transformative constitutions. India was there, and other countries. Transformative aspect of a constitution is very context specific. So if you talk about India in the context of transformation, you're talking about a constitution in before 1950, and what was it really being made to transform? It was about the caste system, inequality in the society, lack of fraternity, significant issues of liberty. That is what they were transforming. South Africa, what was the main transformation? It's really racial justice and redistribution of economic opportunities. So what, when we talk about Kenya, then what is our transformation? It's about rule of law. It's about economic justice. And that economic justice pegs also on devolution, because let's not forget, devolution does two very specific things. It is a tool for economic justice primarily, even more than it is a tool for political participation. And so, and then the last point on constitutionalization of politics. Our constitution says nothing is above it and nothing can't be judged or nothing, there is nothing that it cannot judge. If you go to Article 165, which gives the High Court jurisdiction, it's very, very specific that the courts can look at anything said to be done under the Constitution or any law. There is nothing that in the exercise of public power, and the Constitution, in fact, goes beyond public power, but there's nothing in the exercise of public power that's outside the purview of the Constitution. So those are the terms of reference you give a Chief Justice. And those are the terms of reference that a Chief Justice has to meet. And if those are the terms of reference, you can't come around and say, oh, you're not observing your lane. You are straddling lanes, or you're moving to the executive lane. There is no executive lane when it comes to the Constitution or judging whether things are constitutional. And a Chief Justice who is so cautious so that they are not seen to be offending the executive by calling on the executive when the executive is wrong, or the legislature, or the judiciary itself, that Chief Justice would be shortchanging not just the Kenyans, but the Constitution. So it's important. And a Chief Justice who thinks that they can just go and negotiate in private about which judge or which candidates who are recommended by the Judicial Service Commission to drop because the president doesn't like that candidate, or somebody in the executive doesn't like that candidate, or the Attorney General feels that that candidate doesn't represent certain political leanings. That Chief Justice wouldn't just be doing the wrong thing, he would actually be acting, he or she would be acting against the Constitution. And that is why Bobby was talking about negotiating those relationships extremely carefully and talking about confrontation here, not necessarily to be confrontational, but to keep remembering that your terms of reference as the Chief Justice is the Constitution, not what Uhuru Kenyatta wants, not what Raila Odinga wants, or anyone else for that matter. And you are only answerable to the people, not to the executive and to the legislature. Yes, there is oversight and you have to respect that, but in terms of performance of duties. So in my view, whether it's navigating relationship in a confrontational way and all that, I think the fundamental point is it's not your personal preferences. It's more about what the institution and the Constitution requires, which then, and this is a quick last point, I said one of the biggest gains under both Mutunga and Maraga's leadership was institutional courage. Institutional courage starts from personal courage of the Chief Justice. And it's very important to distinguish between institutional courage and personal courage. A judge, a regular judge, can be okay for courage. They can measure within 5 out of 10. That's fine. As long as there is strong institutional courage, they'll be able to carry out their responsibility. However, a Chief Justice level of personal courage and level of wanting to deliver the vision that they bring to the office, and the level of clarity that she has to have in terms of purpose of her office cannot be a 5 out of 10. It has to be very, very high, because that is what inspires institutional courage. Why do I say this? We've already started seeing in the last, just in the last few days, the last few months, institutional courage of the judiciary winning. Judges getting matters and they just want to divvy them up to 5 judge benches or 3 judge benches. They don't want to take responsibility. And in a way, we can't blame the judges, because the judiciary is being bashed from all angles. But partly why we've had a very good experience with institutional courage in the last 7 or 8, 9 years is because Chief Justice Mutunga brought with him personal courage, where he was not even willing to negotiate about his stand or his hearing, whichever way you like, because that represented something about his identity and his position. Maraga was very, very clear on his personal courage. If you sacrifice that, you end up diminishing institutional courage. And so at the end of the day, we're not really looking for an administrator, we are looking for a leader. I don't mean that an administrator can't be a leader, but the first and most important principle is leadership. Leadership requires courage, but it also requires what Bobby was talking about, being very suave at negotiating relationships. Let me just stop there so that I don't take all the time. Silas, thank you.
Thank you, Waikwa. Bobby, are you there? All right, Bobby. Okay, I'll go to Don. Oh, there he is, Bobby.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps I'll talk about two issues in a broad sense of way. politics, the role of politics, and the judiciary. And I think I would like to begin by stating that we must appreciate that we've been saying, even within this forum, that the judiciary is an arm of government, an arm of the state, and a very important one at that. And if you broaden that, the state being a political creature, it's an institution born of and sustained through politics. So in a sense, the institution of the judiciary is a political institution. And so what is important to demarcate and appreciate is how the judiciary undertakes that political role, where and when. And I think the Constitution is very much clear about that. Going back to the philosophical underpinnings of the judiciary being the institution, and especially in a democratic constitutional dispensation and a republic like ours, the judiciary ensuring that the political will of Kenyans is affirmed, reaffirmed, and confirmed whenever there is doubt. So we, I think, need to disabuse ourselves from this notion that the judiciary is not a political player. But I think I would understand in the sense that we also appreciate politics in our country, that the judiciary should not be subservient to impartial and biased political wills and whims, that the judiciary should not be seen to be perpetrating and strengthening or advocating the politics of any personality, political party, or ideology. And that's why the fences within the Constitution and other legislative pronouncements are there to ensure that when the judiciary plays its role in ensuring that the political voice of Kenyans is exercised as they wish and will, then it is doing the job that Kenyans want. And so for that matter, the hiring of the Chief Justice, judges and magistrates will forever, and other judicial officials will forever invite political intrigue, and especially the Chief Justice. And in Kenya, this is becoming more important because we have seen that almost as it's becoming cultural and traditional, that the presidential elections results must be and will be contested in the courts and within our new dispensation, the Supreme Court. And so definitely politicians will be interested, and for that, senior politicians for that matter will be interested in who becomes the Chief Justice, who become justices in the Supreme Court, and for the other players who joins the Court of Appeal and the High Court. And we see this in other jurisdictions in as much as the hire and fire mechanisms might be different. For instance, when you look at the US, where the president is the one who taps potential justices to serve in the Supreme Court, and they go through confirmation by a political institution, and that is the Senate. And that's why it is important and I think Waigwa did speak to this issue, that the ladies and gentlemen that eventually do proceed and are confirmed within the conveyor belt of recruitment are alive and have the presence of mind of the fact that once they swear their oaths of office, it is the Constitution, it is law as is envisaged and dictated by Kenyans that they should uphold. And this is what they come to use as their basis of mandate. There is criteria like we are going and we are seeing right now in ensuring that the threshold, in terms of qualifications, in terms of high moral standing, public posture that is confirmed, where the National Assembly is involved, and particularly perhaps sometimes they don't play that role as should be, but they should understand that it is the political institution. And so when they are vetting a potential Chief Justice, it is that issue of impartiality, non-partisanship, and unbiased stance and posture that they should be able to prod out of potential candidates, because that is their interest. What is your stance? What is your ideological opinion? What is your relationship with different political players and institutions? And can you demonstrate to Kenyans that you can live and operate beyond those stances? And so I think for that matter, that is going to be very, very important, and will always remain very, very important. And a process like this one where we are trying to create, or we are creating expectations of what Kenyans want of the Chief Justice. It is important for them, the ladies and gentlemen who are going through the process of recruitment, to understand that we know that they come from different political environments. They have been hired through a largely political process, and they are going to serve within a certain political environment again. And for that matter, going forward in Kenya, we have BBI issues coming up. It's almost a given that BBI may have to be decided by the courts, eventually. We have the elections, general elections coming up next year. And so the Chief Justice must have the presence of mind to know that Kenyans do expect he or she, like the former Chief Justices, to perform beyond these political precincts.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bobby, for that. Just been informed that we have the benefit of having Roslyn Hanzi online now, and we will let her speak, perhaps putting back all this together. And what Bobby has been saying, what Don has been saying in terms of ensuring that we have a good Chief Justice, what Waikwa has been saying in terms of ensuring that that institutional courage is upheld. Roslyn, maybe can you tell us, what should Kenya look for exactly? What kind of person do you urge us to really look for? Over to you, Roslyn.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Jambo.
Jambo, hi Roslyn, how are you?
So,
go on.
Sorry, I think I have a Chief Justice of Kenya, maybe also to share the views that we have as lawyers in Zimbabwe, who are also following the developments in Kenya and other countries. We have been emulating some of the best practices in terms of how the Chief Justice has been deciding on certain issues. So when we look at the process that you're going to be going through, we hope that you're going to be going through a process that allows a Chief Justice who is appointed based on merit, not on any other ground. And we hope that the process that you are going to be having is a process that is going to be transparent. And in terms of transparency, some of the best practices that we have seen include the public interview processes, where at least the Chief Justice is interviewed by a panel. And in most of the countries, the panel is from this commission, where they interrogate the suitability of the Chief Justice to hold that office in a very open manner, in which even members of the public who are going to be the users, the end users of the whole judicial system, where the Chief Justice is going to be presiding, whether it's going to be the magistrate court, the high court, or the other courts that are in Kenya, they will have the confidence that at least this Chief Justice was appointed based on merit, where the credentials, the track record of the judge or whoever the candidate is going to be is actually open to public scrutiny, and they can actually even also be able to input ahead of the interview process in terms of the issues that those who are going to be interviewing should be throwing out during that interview process.
Thank you so much, Rosalind, for that. I think you have really given us very useful things for us to note, knowing that in the next few weeks we are going to be in this process in a very, in a manner that we hope that is going to espouse the provisions of the Constitution 2010, as well as regional protocols and conventions. I'll ask my colleague, Jane, to take us over the next session as we wind up. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Silas. Indeed, this has been a very interesting conversation, and we can go on and on. But being conscious of time, I will now invite the panelists to give us their closing remarks and to particularly respond to the question of, we have seen the list of applicants for the position of Chief Justice. We have seen the short list of 10 names. And as you give your closing remarks, what are your thoughts on the list? Are there any gaps? And if there are any gaps, how can we address those gaps? Over to you. We start with you, Dawn, then we'll go to Waikwa.
Actually for myself, if you allow me, I don't want to go into the names. I just want to reiterate what we've said in terms of the attributes that we should be looking for, which the process that Kenya has embarked upon through the Judicial Service Commission should bring out. So for me, this is a SI unit with which to assess all those 10 names currently, and to see which one we think is best for Kenya at this time. And I think the point has been made about leadership. If you're to ask me, the top 5 things I'd look for leadership. 1, I'd look for ethics and integrity. 2, I'd look for courage. 3, I'd look for proficiency in law and constitutionalism. 4, and 5, I'd look for now proficiency in management and administration. And I think Waiko and Bobby brought out this point that the Chief Justice is first and foremost the leader of an arm of government, of an important arm of government, of a crucial arm of government when our countries, our continent, our world is in the midst of a democratic recession. So first and foremost, we want a leader who will lead from the front and who will lead change and who will lead in keeping the institution alive and vibrant. For me, second is a question of ethics and integrity. We want a woman or man with unimpeachable character. If she or he enters the job with an unimpeachable character, he or she will not be easily blackmailed or bullied or intimidated. So it is good to check what has been his track record, whether on the bench, at the bar, in the academy, and what has been their public service track record, especially the voluntary service track record. What have they done with which we can judge what they're likely to do in the future? Third is a point about courage and strength. And we say that our Chief Justice must possess, must portray, and must project strength so that the judiciary as an institution also projects strength. So I just repeat again, the point was made well by Bobby and by Waikwa about personal courage beyond just the institutional courage, and that it requires wisdom, tolerance, restraint, and picking your fights. Fourth, the Chief Justice must be proficient in law. He or she must know the law. We don't expect them to know everything, but they must have a firm basic grounding on what are the principles of the law and constitutionalism and a commitment to lifelong learning. And finally, is proficiency in management and administration. This person will be called upon to manage an institution, an important institution of government. So we need to be measuring what has been their knowledge, skills, and experience in management and administration, managing human resources, technical resources, financial resources. I am not confusing or conflating their role with that of the chief registrar, who's the chief accounting officer, or even the Judicial Service Commission, which has some rules around strategy and supervision of how the judiciary runs. But he or she is still going to be the chief officer of government. So I think for me, that's important. One final thing I'll talk about is the issue of disobedience of court orders and the issue of judicial funding. And for me, my approach to them is the same. First, what should the judiciary do? And then two, what should other actors do? So first, and for me, it's the same thing in terms of assuring that the judiciary has the sufficient amount of human, technical, financial resources. And also in terms of ensuring that its decisions are followed. This should be a continuing dialogue, in my view, between the heads of the three arms of government, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. This should be an area of continuing dialogue, of interdependence. I think in countries like ours, we have the National Council for the Administration of Justice. This should also be a very important role for the National Council for the Administration of Justice. If need be, they should have working committees on these issues. Working committee on judicial funding or on funding to the institutions within the National Council, and working committees on implementation of decisions, especially of the courts. I think this should be a recurring theme of the Chief Justice and of the judiciary during judicial open days, legal aid days, and so on. And there's role for other actors. For instance, what is the role of the law society in ensuring that the judiciary has sufficient resources? And beyond just speeches that are made at meetings, what kind of structures do we have internally as a law society to ensure that resources are there and that we track these resources year in, year out, and that we publish this? So there's a role for the council there. I think there's a role for engagement of the senior council committee. And there's a role for engaging other arms of government with regard to this thing. How do we directly as a law society engage the chief registrar on the issues of the budget? How do we engage Parliament, especially the portfolio committees of Parliament? And how do we engage lawyers who happen to be legislators in the Senate and the National Assembly? And the roles for other sectors of society, the media can call attention to this issue, the citizens themselves. In our own country, the Institute of Economic Affairs, IEA, has tried to be quite prolific in terms of assessing governmental income and expenditure and trends, including the judiciary. This is very important so that the issues of judiciary are not left to lawyers only. It's an important issue for all of society and so on. And then we can also engage internationally in these issues. One, we can engage through litigation. As I said, that's one of the issues that came out of the meeting we had last week, PALU and the African Court Coalition. We can use the regional courts and tribunals. We can use treaty reports under the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, under the African Governance Architecture, that's APRM, and also under the Universal Periodic Review to engage our own government as to how it resources the judiciary, but also how it implements the decisions coming out of the judiciary, especially the apex judiciary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Roslyn? If we don't have Roslyn, then we can have Waikwa.
Thanks, Jen. Just quickly, just summing up, again, for me, the critical things to look at is maybe just in terms of the list of applicants. I think Don has cautioned us and given us the right caution, so we can discuss specific applicants. But I wanted to make some kind of an anecdote or comment. When the current Chief Justice of South Africa was being selected, there was a lot of controversy because he was believed to be very close to the presidents of South Africa, and he was one of the youngest judges, both in age, but also the time he joined the Supreme Court or the Constitutional Court. And so a lot of pundits believed that he was being selected because he's pliable and would be manipulated by the executive to do its bidding. Why is that important? Because while we have the list of names of individuals and we formed our own individual opinions on who can do or who will do the best job, you can never be sure until the person is in office. What Mogoeng has done, and some of us may disagree with this analysis, is he's actually been able to protect the independence of the judiciary and been very, very vocal, very assertive, when a lot of people never expected that. We also had the same, some of us had some of that judgment with Justice Maraga when he came in, and so he may have surprised a number of us. So at the end of the day, it's the person fully understanding, one, you're being called into leadership of an arm of government, and regardless of your past idiosyncrasies in politics or association, you have a constitutional duty to play and you answer to the Constitution. As a leader, three very key duties. One, you're leading an arm of government and an entire institution, so the leadership and the administrative skills that Don talked about are key. But more importantly, making sure that you're the guardrail or you provide sufficient cover to be the guardrail in terms of asserting the judiciary space within the state and protecting independence. Again, just to give an example here, people who've followed closely how Justice Roberts in the US goes with his decision, and when he joins whichever majority, sometimes even liberals when not expected, can tell you something about things that a Chief Justice has to negotiate to keep the independence of the judiciary and the integrity of the judiciary. The second is something we never talk much about. The Chief Justice assigns judges to stations, but critically under Article 165.4, he or she is the one who chooses the judges to hear very, very consequential public interest cases. And that requires a certain skill, including being able to know the strength of your judges. And they're not few. So you need to be in touch with your judges and you can't just be aloof. But that shapes not just jurisprudence, but the place of the judiciary in the society. But more importantly, it also delivers or helps deliver the vision of the Constitution to the people. Finally, Supreme Court. At the end of the day, the Chief Justice is the president of the Supreme Court, but also a judge. And two things that are important. A Supreme Court has to be visible. A Supreme Court has to be respected. Supreme Courts are respected for their jurisprudential authority, their intellectual depth, their ability to know what are consequential cases, both for your society, but cases that will have ripple effects beyond the society. And a Chief Justice has to help as president of the court to navigate that space, but has to deliver for Kenyans, and this is important, an efficient, effective, and hardworking Supreme Court, but a Supreme Court that shows significant intellectual depth. And the Chief Justice has to lead in that intellectual fight. If you look at other Supreme Courts in the world, for very consequential decisions, Chief Justices pen those decisions. It's not by accident, it's by design. And so whoever is taking up this position has to know that there is a lot that both the Constitution, the people are demanding from her or him. And finally, high self-esteem and just being gracious. Arrogance will not do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Waikwa. And Bobby, if you could just briefly, very briefly, sum it up for us.
Well, I think, as earlier pointed out, we are living in or within the context of the diminution of democracy and the democratic space globally and also within our country. This is very much in witness. And so as we march forward, and especially what we have seen that has occasioned this derogation of the democratic space, even in countries where for eons we have thought to have strong democratic institutions, we have seen the damage that individuals and individual players can perform upon these institutions. And these institutions include constitutions, include our courts, our legislative bodies, and our own sovereignty. And so there is now the emerging focus and attention that individual players are as important in ensuring that they live up to the strength and robustness of good institutions. And so when we're looking for a new Chief Justice, we must ask ourselves whether we have good institutions, whether we have robust institutions, and for that matter, the institution of the judiciary. And I think, save for the shortcomings and the missing links that were earlier pointed out, it has come out from many Kenyans that in as much as a lot needs to be done, the institution of the judiciary has made great strides in or on the journey of transformation in order to play its role in activating and animating the promise of the new constitution. And this needs to be entrenched and even re-emphasized. The celebrated American philosopher, Professor Noam Chomsky, always reminds us that at times it's not heroes that we should be looking for, but good ideas that we should be looking at and for. And so we must again ask ourselves whether in the way we have crafted our state, the way we have crafted our judiciary, the way we have crafted our constitution, whether this is a good idea, and whether this idea now can be matched and be fitted with this hero that we are looking for. And I think that's what the incoming Chief Justice needs to be alive to. In terms of the ladies and gentlemen that have been shortlisted, I have to say that for me, I have a certain bias without going into the individual names. One, I want a Chief Justice who is impartial and who is biased. Impartial and biased in the sense of protecting the Constitution and the independence of the judiciary and the principle of the rule of law. I think the incoming Chief Justice should be very impartial when it comes to ensuring that the rule of law, the Constitution, and the independence of the Constitution is protected, and for that matter, jealously. Transformation, transition, our country is going through this. And in that sense, we, even in terms of optics, and I think somebody spoke about this, the dress and address of the institution of the judiciary, access to justice, but also in optics of dismantling. Right now in the current political discourse, we are talking about dynasties and hustlers. And for me, in terms of dynasties, I'm thinking about all these institutions that, patriarchal institutions that have entrenched themselves to become the traditions and the cultures that we want to believe our state should be. And I think we need to make changes, and even in the sense of identity and what we see. And so for me, I would be biased that for the first time, Kenya would join the bandwagon of other 5 African countries, Sudan, Ethiopia, the Seychelles, Lesotho, in ensuring that we see our first lady Chief Justice. And in that regard, I have to pronounce my bias in whom I would want to see finally as the next Chief Justice of Kenya. Obviously, guided by 3 things: the Constitution, the Constitution, and the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bobby, and thank you for summing it up for us. I think the takeaway here is we need leadership, we need ethics, we need courage, both at a personal and institutional level. We need somebody who's proficient in law and proficient in management. We need somebody, as Bobby puts it, who is impartial and biased towards the protection of the independence of the judiciary and also guarding the Constitution, recognizing the role of the Supreme Court and the role of that jurisprudence, not only in Kenya, but also in the region. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have to bring today's webinar to a close. I take this opportunity on behalf of the ICJ Kenya Council and the Secretariat to extend our very sincere gratitude to our distinguished panelists. Dawn there, we have Waikwa Wanyoike, we have Bobby Mkangi and Roslyn Hansi. Thank you so much for making our discussions today very interesting and interactive.
Yeah, thank you, Jane, and thank you to panelists as well. Thank you to everyone who joined us today, our participants. Thank you for your active engagement, and thank you to our product team who I hope at the back of the scenes who have been able to support us very well and who have really put up a lot of great efforts in ensuring that this is has come up together very well. Until next time, thank you so much, Asanteni, and have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
The next Chief Justice of Kenya should be bold,
a good communicator,
courageous, confident, is a person of integrity,
independent and not influenced by politicians,
diligent,
the strong jurisprudential background and track record,